Today in the Larson garage, we're wrapping up the CJ, getting everything crossed off this list, and finally getting the Jeep out of the garage. Alright, so looking at the front hub, right about there, the tires would be straight going down the road. So when driving the CJ, this is what the steering wheel has looked like for the past 10 years or so. It's about 90 degrees off. So that's what we need to try and address. Figure out how can we get this to where when the wheel's straight, the tires will also be straight. So generally any steering wheel adjustment you could make by adjusting this drag link, adjusting the ends in and out, and that would move the pitman arm slightly in order to straighten the wheel out. But considering how far off the wheel is, we're not going to be able to do that on the CJ. We would end up running either bottoming these out or extending them too far. So we need to do something else here. Alright, so in order to adapt the YJ steering column and tub down to the CJ frame and the steering box, we needed to essentially adapt the YJ end of the steering column down to what the original CJ steering was. And so there's this piece of pipe in here that's welded. So what we're going to do, we're going to pull this the steering column out, or the steering shaft out, grind the welds, straighten the steering wheel, and then re-weld it, tack it, re-weld it all in, and then we'll be good. So what happened is when this was welded, the steering wheel wasn't on, and so we didn't know or didn't realize that the steering wheel was so far out of position. Alright, so now that we have the steering shaft in and tacked together, we want to check and make sure that it's in the right spot. So how we're going to do that, I'm going to go in, turn the steering wheel, and we're going to watch in a very scientific way the steering shaft, how it moves, and what we're using as a reference for now is the mud stains that are on the valve covers. So you see the little dots. As it spins, you can see that pipe getting closer or further away from certain ones. And then that gives us an idea of how we need to make some adjustments and then get it as close as we can. Alright, so we get the steering shaft all welded up. It's still hot right now, so we're going to wait, let it cool off, and then we'll paint it before we throw it back in the Jeep. But while this cools off, we're going to jump over and start bleeding the brakes. Now, bleeding the brakes has always been a task that's tough to do by yourself. So there's a couple tools that I use to help me with this. There's a vacuum bleeder. So same thing, it runs off of air, but this time it uses a vacuum. Instead of pushing the fluid down, it pulls the fluid through the lines out of the bleeder. And so there's just the rubber end that slips over the bleeder. Turn the vacuum on, crack the bleeder, and it pulls all the fluid out and any air with it. And then you can just keep retopping the master cylinder until you get all of the air out or all the old fluid out. So now we have the tool here. I already have it hooked up to the air line. And so the way it works is a trigger, and as you pull the trigger, it makes the vacuum to this little boot. So we'll stick the boot on, turn this on, and then crack the bleeder, and then we'll see the fluid come out, and sometimes you can even see the bubbles come out through the hose. Alright, so now as we do this, it's tough to see, you probably can't see it on camera, the fluid coming through, but I'm going to go check the master and make sure we're not running that dry. And I didn't say before, but we are starting at the wheel furthest away from the master, trying to suck any air or fluid to the furthest point, and then we'll start getting closer on all the other wheels. Alright, so we got the brakes all bled. I even went in and flushed the fluid in the clutch, just because it's much easier to access with the steering shaft out of there. So we can cross off bleed brakes, steering. The paint's still drying on the steering shaft, so now we'll go to windshield. And so more specifically the windshield seal. So with the Jeep, I've always had it leak anytime it rains. Between the windshield frame and the tub, water gets in. And it's actually wrecked 2 radios that the water gets in, runs behind the dash. So I just put a new radio in, so now this is the 3rd one, and I don't want to have to keep swapping those out. So I got some weather stripping. We'll fold the windshield down, put a couple extra weather stripping pieces in there, and hopefully that'll seal up and keep us dry. Alright, so on the CJ, it's just a couple bolts, 1 bolt on each side to take out, and then the whole windshield folds right down. So you can see on the tub here, it's just flat. So obviously there's the windshield frame, the seal, and then it's all smooth, and then the dash. So it's pretty easy for the water to sneak through that seal and then just come right in and get behind the dash, and even sometimes would come over the dash. So I put a couple pieces of weather stripping, 1 in the back, 1 in the front on the seal itself, and then I have some more that I'm going to put right on the tub, right along the edge here. So then the water, instead of just being able to come straight by, it's going to have to try and go up and over. So the steering shaft is all fully welded. We got it painted and it's dry now. So let's toss it back in, toss the wheels back on, and then see how it looks, how close we got with the steering wheel and the wheels, and then any small adjustments we can make within the drag link from here. So we got the steering shaft in, got the tires back on, the wheels are pretty straight, and the steering wheel's pretty much right in the middle. And we'll see once we start driving it. Obviously there's a little play in the steering, so we'll see exactly where it lines up. But any final adjustments we can make just by adjusting the drag link like you normally would. So we can cross the steering off the list now, and then we'll jump onto the onboard air. So the CJ already had the onboard air on it. It's on the list just because we're doing some updates to it. So it has a V-air, a Vi-air, compressor, as well as 2.5 gallon tank. Now the tank has been mounted under the hood. We just took it out in order to get to the steering column. So we'll put this back in. But the big change that we're doing previously when I put the system in, I wired it all up, got it all plumbed, but running from the compressor to the tank, I had just used one of these sort of expandable lines. It's a 1/4 inch, and obviously way too long for what I was using it for. So we're going to toss this out, and what we're going to put in instead, it's a 10-foot 3/8 line. So it's obviously much shorter than that, bigger diameter, so the air will flow a lot smoother from the compressor to the tank, so hopefully it'll fill up faster. I also have some protective sheathing to go over the air hose, just to make sure nothing rubs through it, especially when it's going through the firewall. So I got it hooked up to the compressor side. We'll get the tank thrown back in, and then get this routed up through into the engine compartment. Now that the onboard air is all hooked up and pressurized, we can cross that off the list. Now the only thing left to do is a quick oil change. Alright, so we got the list all crossed off. Obviously got the Jeep out of the garage. Took it for a little drive, got it all washed up, so it's now set to enjoy, which is what I'm going to go do right now. So thank you for taking the time and watching this video. Be sure to check back in with the Larson garage. We still have quite a few other projects besides the CJ. Still have that half Jeep that we'll be going through making sheet metal panels for. So I'm going to go drive my Jeep, but I'll see you guys later.